Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. We're going to be talking about the business side of the video games industry today. This is not a topic that I like to talk about much. I would much rather just sit there and focus on the arts side of things because that is where my interest in video games lie. I really don't care about which businesses are successful, which ones are making money and whatever. I just want to play nice games. But news of the last couple of weeks has been so big, so dramatic, and so impactful that the arts side of the games industry is going to be directly affected by what is going on. Anybody that follows the games industry probably knows what I'm talking about, but it is acquisitions. There has been a lot of very big acquisitions over the last couple of weeks, and that is going to accelerate further according to sources and people that are pretty close to what is going on in the industry. So it started about a year ago. I think it was a year ago. The dates are a bit vague. But Microsoft purchased Bethesda for a very large amount of money. And that seemed to start a whole chain of events that has since led to Microsoft purchasing Activision a couple of weeks ago for a stupidly large sum of money. And then Sony has come through and made their own big acquisition of Bungie, the developer of Destiny and whatnot. That was announced yesterday. And the reason I want to do this video is not to dissect those acquisitions, because to be honest, I really don't care. But it's more to talk about the response that people have had to those pieces of news, because there seems to be a lot of people out there that think that this is a good thing. They're talking about which acquisitions will happen next, who will make them, how much they'll be, and they seem to think that all of this is some kind of positive news for the industry, but it's not. That's the purpose of this video. I want to make it quite clear that acquisitions, I keep saying Activision, acquisitions are not good for the video game industry. It was already consolidated enough, and this additional level of consolidation is going to dramatically impact on the quality and variety of games that we get. See, the thing is, this is all very much a monopoly play, and it's coming from Microsoft. It's quite aggressive, and the other companies are going to have to play defensive in response. I think that's where Sony came from. The Bungie acquisition likely started after Bethesda. Sony realized that Microsoft was going to buy more companies. They weren't going to stop at Bethesda. So they started looking around for their own big studios to pick up. There are people that, for whatever reason, seem to think in complete ignorance that a deal could be reached in 2 weeks. So they seem to believe that Sony started talking to Bungie after Microsoft announced Activision as a way of responding to Activision. But you don't go and buy a $3 billion company in 2 weeks of conversations and have legal check-in and all that kind of stuff. No, it's likely that Sony started to have those talks with Bungie as a result of the Bethesda acquisition. So Sony will need to respond to Activision at some point as well. And as I have seen plenty of people say, there are plenty more acquisitions on the horizon. These conversations have not stopped. There are still companies to be purchased, and we're going to get those announcements in the coming weeks and months. But the point is, this is all being driven by Microsoft because Microsoft wants to have an actual monopoly on the content. And the reason they want to do that is they want to push people onto Game Pass. It's not because Microsoft wants any particular IP. They really don't care about those things. What they do care about is having as much high-selling content as possible that they can shift onto a subscription service without having to invest big time on getting it on there. If Microsoft needed to pay Activision to get Call of Duty onto Game Pass, that was going to become an incredibly expensive thing for them over the long term. This way, they can have every year's edition of Call of Duty on there for relatively little cost. And Game Pass, as I've said in the past, concerns me because Game Pass will fundamentally shift the way that games are made and consumed. At the moment, you can get away with having a shorter game because people will pay for it. They'll sit there, they'll play it, they'll talk about it and whatever, but the money has already gone to the developers. The metrics in the way that things are paid for in the subscription world are based on hours played. So what we're going to see is more and more developers incentivized to make longer and longer games, compromise the quality of the narrative, compromise the experience, do whatever it takes just to keep people playing. We've already seen this play out In the mobile space, where free-to-play games are much the same, you don't get to make money as a developer if your free-to-play game lasts for 2 hours and then it's done. Where you make your money is if the free-to-play game stretches that 2 hours over 200 hours and then incentivizes you to keep paying. The difference is, of course, with Game Pass, there isn't the microtransactions and whatever, but the metrics are the same, and the developers are going to be incentivized in the same way. So I am deeply concerned with Microsoft's efforts to push everybody onto Game Pass. I don't think that's going to be good for the industry. I don't think that the acquisitions that Microsoft is making to push this is going to be a good thing. I think it's going to change the games that get made, and I think it's going to change the breadth of games that get made, because they're going to become narrower and narrower. We're already seeing that as well. In the AAA space, those open world action adventure experiences are the ones that sell, and so everybody's doing them. That's pretty much the entire AAA industry these days. It's either shooters or those things, and that's not variety, and that's only going to get narrower and narrower with more and more games being pushed onto these services, especially if we get to the point where the companies that end up owning everything, Microsoft and Sony, for example, then decide to start consolidating what gets made within their studios. If Microsoft were to decide we don't need 10 different versions of shooters, let's just get the Activision guys to make the shooter. Or Sony says we don't need 15 different open world experiences, let's drop some of these and just have a couple of studios working on those while we have other studios doing other shooter games to compete with Microsoft. There is going to be a consolidation in the types of games that get made at that top end. The other great concern then is what happens to all the little guys. What happens when it becomes harder to get your games out there because, firstly, games don't sell upfront anymore because people are on subscription services, but secondly, you need to do deals to get the game on the subscription service. I have heard from plenty of sources that it is much harder getting a game on Game Pass than it is just publishing a game on the Xbox Store. And I would imagine that once Sony announces its own subscription service, it's also going to be highly curated for the same reason. If these things start to happen, then being an independent to these business models becomes a lot harder, especially when additionally these companies are incentivized to block these games. If people are playing games that they don't have control over, then they lose a little bit of their control. So they are going to make it harder, and it is going to be more difficult to be an independent or mid-tier developer publisher. So the end result is they go up for sale, which Microsoft and Sony will pick up. None of this is going to seem surprising to people that follow markets and whatnot, because it has all happened before plenty often in the past. This is just consolidation. This is just the process of a couple of companies becoming so big that they are effectively monopolies. In technical terms, they're not considered monopolies within the eye of the law, but then the law has always been friendly towards capitalism. So there isn't really the incentive there for the regulatory bodies to step in and prevent these things from happening. But every single time, monopolies do not benefit consumers. In fact, when you think about it, all of the activity that Microsoft is doing, it is not for the gamers. It is not for the consumers. They don't care about those things. It is there purely because this is the way that they're going to make more money. They want people on Game Pass not because it's a good service. They don't care about that. They want people on Game Pass because they've seen how much money it makes in music and in television, and they want a piece of that. They want to be the ones that are the Netflix of video games. Netflix has been an issue itself, and Spotify, we've seen the issues with Spotify over the last couple of weeks. These companies are not out there to support artists. They are not out there to support consumers. The only people that these acquisitions benefit are the CEOs and the executives. The only people that these subscription services benefit are the CEOs and the executives. And until people realize that, until people stop celebrating that, this industry is just going to keep circling down this drain. We may not feel the effects of it immediately because these things take time to happen, but the games industry is going to change in a way that is not positive, and it is going to do so over the next couple of years. It is going to get harder and harder to find interesting games to play. The only standout at this stage, the only holdout, seems to be the Japanese industry, and the reason that those companies are not being acquired is because those companies tend to be very diversified. I've seen a lot of people, for example, saying, oh, somebody should buy Konami because Konami has a lot of IP that they don't use. People have this perception that Konami is a lazy company that isn't interested in all of this excellent IP that they have, and they could be making more money, and people want to see these games saved. They want to see a new Suikoden and a new Metal Gear, so somebody should buy out Konami. But that's not going to happen because Konami owns gambling businesses. Konami owns health club businesses. To acquire Konami, you're acquiring all of its additional business units, and then you need to diversify. You need to divest from those businesses. You need to get rid of them. Microsoft is not going to buy a company in Japan, get all of these business units that it doesn't want, and then try and deal with them. The reason that Activision was an appealing acquisition for Microsoft is because every single cent of that acquisition is there to support Game Pass. Buying Konami gets Microsoft pachinko machines, which doesn't interest Microsoft. Buying Sega gets Microsoft a UFO, crane catcher game and a toy business, which doesn't suit Microsoft. So they're not going to buy those companies. The Japanese industry is the one that is a holdout by virtue of the fact that these companies aren't of interest to the Western companies. But what's going to happen to those companies is because they are increasingly struggling to get presence in these kind of highly monopolized worlds, then they're going to circle the drain themselves. They're going to find it harder and harder and harder to operate as they are because they just don't have the same opportunities. There's nowhere for them to publish games that is friendly to them, and it's just going to get harder for them as well. So none of this is good for the industry. And I am rambling a little bit in this video, I realize, but I'm just so frustrated by the number of conversations that I see are just so breathlessly excited for the consolidation and the monopolies. There are people, so many people out there, including the media, including the high kind of prominent influencers, including the consumers, across all of these categories, there are people that are just so excited for something that is bad for us all. And that's frustrating. I would much rather people understand the actual implications of consolidation, the actual implications of these companies trying to push business models in which they're walled gardens and they have complete control. Because the whole idea of the digital industry, the whole idea of the way that video games were going a couple of years ago was that it was meant to be easier. Platforms were meant to be open and more accessible to developers. And the creativity was meant to improve as a result. Anybody was going to be able to publish games anywhere and make money and all that kind of stuff. That's going away because these companies are incentivized and will incentivize others to participate in very walled gardens. Anyway, that's enough of this video. That's enough of this rant. I do not like what is going on in this industry. I am not amused by any of these acquisitions. That's not me being a Microsoft or Sony fanboy. I'm sure in the comments we'll get some people that say these things, but it's not. I don't care. I just care about the games being good, and I don't see the games being good as a result of these acquisitions. It's not going to help game development by any means. All right, do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you do enjoy the videos and the work that we're doing, you can support us on Patreon. You can do so for just $1 a month or more if you're feeling generous. And by doing so, you do get access to a digital magazine that we publish every month, which is full of information about Japanese art and culture and games, but not just games. We also talk about music and film and literature and travel and tourism and food and all the good stuff. So if you're interested in Japanese culture and art and games on any level, you'll find that magazine interesting. Do mash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy what we do. That way you won't miss any videos. And I can assure you that digitallydownloaded.net is not going to be acquired by anybody. We will remain firmly independent, and whether that is going to cost us or not, it probably will in the long run, but we are going to continue to do what we are doing without that hanging over our heads. All right, thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you at the next video.